Let me tell you something about interspecies diplomacy. When a human goes quiet, that's when you evacuate the galaxy. My name is Krell, Senior Diplomat of the Valorian Collective, and apparently the universe's most gullible sentient. I've spent 12 stellar cycles representing my people at the Galactic Council, a feat that requires the patience of a hibernating Zentarian and the alcohol tolerance of a Bogovian waste filter. The council chambers themselves are a marvel of engineering if your definition of marvel includes excessive holographic projections and chairs ergonomically designed to be uncomfortable for everyone. Today's emergency session had drawn representatives from all 17 major spacefaring civilizations. The Florixians were floating in their bubbling tanks, the Zentarians were perched on their anti-gravity discs, and the Meraxians were, well, being Meraxians, shedding their metallic scales everywhere and complaining about the room temperature. Then there was the human. Captain Marcus Reed stood a head shorter than most species present, which didn't stop him from somehow projecting the aura of being the tallest person in the room. Humans had only joined the Council 80 years ago, practically yesterday in cosmic terms, yet they'd already developed a reputation that made even the warrior caste Draconians nervous. Council Leader Thrix's 6 eyes blinked in disturbing asynchrony as she activated the central holographic display. "We face an unprecedented crisis," she announced, her translator converting her chittering into standard galactic common. "The Drakari Hegemony has deployed a battle fleet toward the joint colony of New Horizon. Intelligence suggests they plan to seize the planet's quantum crystal reserves." The chamber erupted into the usual chaos. The Florixians released panic bubbles that popped with ear-splitting squeaks. The Zentarians began their distress humming. 2 Meraxian representatives got into a heated argument about evacuation protocols. Throughout it all, Captain Reed remained silent. Not the contemplative silence of the Zentarians or the menacing silence of the Draconians. This was something else, an evaluating silence. Like a predator calculating exactly how much energy it would need to expend to catch its prey. "The colony houses over 3 million civilians," continued Thrix, "including significant populations from 12 council species. Our defensive resources in that sector are limited. More chaos, more suggestions ranging from immediate surrender to deploying the mythical planet killer weapons that everyone denies having but everyone suspects everyone else of developing." Still, the human said nothing. When finally prompted directly by Thrix, Captain Reed simply nodded and said, "We'll handle it." 3 words. That's all we got. As the council session dissolved into arguments about jurisdiction and resource allocation, I found myself watching the human. Unlike the rest of us frantically taking notes, making calls, or arguing strategy, he was doodling on his primitive paper notebook. Not typing on a datapad, actually making marks with an archaic writing implement. When the council agreed to send a strike team to coordinate the colony's defense, Captain Reed merely closed his notebook and nodded again. I should have requested emergency leave right then. I should have developed a sudden, debilitating case of Regalian fever. But no, when they called for volunteers, I raised all 4 of my appendages. My species values courage and initiative, you see? What a fool I was. The mission briefing room was significantly less impressive than the council chambers. No holographic displays, just a simple projection screen and uncomfortable metal chairs that somehow managed to be ergonomically unsuitable for every species present. Council Leader Thrix had assigned 5 of us to what she diplomatically called a specialized intervention unit. What she meant was sacrificial diplomatic presence, so the council can claim they tried if everything goes horribly wrong. First was me, Krell, diplomat extraordinaire, and, as it turned out, expendable asset. Then there was Vrex, a draconian tactical expert whose scales changed color with her mood currently a worried orange. Lix, a Florixian engineer, bubbled nervously in his portable tank. Our medic, Zorn, was a Zentarian, whose 6 spindly limbs were constantly rearranging the contents of his medical kit. And then there was Captain Marcus Reed, the human. Strategic Commander Galvix entered the room, his exoskeleton clicking importantly as he activated the display. The situation was even worse than the council had let on. The Drakari fleet included 3 dreadnoughts, 12 cruisers, and an unknown number of fighter squadrons. Our target, New Horizon, had exactly 2 orbital defense platforms and a handful of outdated security ships. "Your mission," said Galvix, looking like he was already planning our memorial service, "is to coordinate with local forces, implement evacuation protocols for priority citizens, and secure the quantum crystal processing facility until reinforcements arrive." "Projected arrival time for reinforcements?" asked Vrex, her scales shifting to a skeptical purple. Galvix's mandibles twitched. 12 standard days. Plix released a stream of panic bubbles that briefly fogged up his tank. "The Drakari fleet will arrive in 3 days. You're asking us to hold out for 9 days against overwhelming odds?" "Not asking," corrected Galvix. "Ordering." Throughout this exchange, Captain Reed was silent, examining the tactical display with an expression humans call a smile. I've come to learn this particular variant wasn't their happy smile. It was their "I've just had a terrible idea that's going to work beautifully" smile. "We'll have limited resources," continued Galvix. "1 diplomatic vessel." "The cosmic joke," interrupted Reed, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Galvix's antennae twitched in annoyance. "That is not the ship's designation." "It is now," said Reed with finality. This was my first real indication of how the mission would go. The human didn't argue or explain or justify. He simply declared his reality and expected the universe to conform. The disturbing part? It did. By the time we left the room, everyone was calling our ship the cosmic joke. We received our individual assignments. I was the diplomatic liaison responsible for coordinating with colony leadership. Vrex would handle defensive strategy. Plix was to secure the crystal facility's technical systems. Zorn would organize medical resources. And Captain Reed? His official assignment was tactical oversight. When Galvix asked if there were any questions, Reed finally spoke again. "Do you have any coffee?" he asked. "The real stuff, not that synthesized garbage." That was his only question before a suicide mission. Not about enemy capabilities or colony defenses or evacuation protocols. Coffee. As we were dismissed, I pulled Vrex aside. "Does the human's behavior seem concerning to you?" Vrex's scales flashed briefly red. "All human behavior is concerning. That's why they terrify everyone." "But he seems so calm about this mission." "That's what scares me," said Vrex. "They only get calm like that when they're about to do something that violates several laws of physics." I should have listened. I should have run. The diplomatic vessel, I refused to call it the cosmic joke on principle, was a sleek, modern ship designed to impress dignitaries while still providing reasonable defense capabilities. At least that was before Captain Reed got his hands on it. Within 6 hours of departure, the human had rearranged the cargo hold into what he called a workshop, requisitioned half our defensive shield power for some unexplained project, and convinced our AI navigator to respond only to the name Jeeves. The rest of us gathered in the communal area, watching with collective horror as the human whistled cheerfully while dismantling critical ship components. "Should we stop him?" asked Plix, his translucent form quivering inside his tank. "You try," said Vrex, her scales a resigned blue. "My third clutch mate tried to stop a human once. They're still finding pieces of him in 3 different star systems." Zorn's spindly limbs twisted anxiously. "I've treated humans before. Medically fascinating. Did you know they can sustain multiple fractures and still function? And their pain tolerance." "Stop," I interrupted. "You're not helping." We spent the next day in uncomfortable silence, each preparing for the mission in our own way. I reviewed diplomatic protocols for dealing with panicked civilian populations. Vrex analyzed what little tactical data we had on Drakari fleet movements. Plix familiarized himself with the crystal facility schematics. Zorn inventoried his medical supplies approximately 19 times. Captain Reed built a crossbow. Not a high-energy particle weapon disguised as a primitive projectile launcher. An actual crossbow, made from ship components that I'm fairly certain were essential for something. When Vrex finally worked up the courage to ask why, he simply replied, Plan C, and went back to carving what appeared to be wooden bolts. On the second night, as the others slept, I found Reed in the galley, drinking his precious coffee and staring at star charts. "May I join you, Captain?" I asked. He gestured to the seat across from him, which I took despite it being painfully designed for bipedal species. "Your reputation precedes you," I said carefully. "Good things, I hope." His face made that not-happy smile again. "Humans have an interesting reputation in the galaxy," I replied diplomatically. Reed laughed. "Let me guess. The Zentarians told you we sleep with our eyes open to watch for predators. The Draconians warned you about our berserker mode. And the Florixians mentioned something about us drinking poison for pleasure. All accurate observations, I noted. And yet here you are, having a civilized conversation with me." "For now," I said, "though I admit your methods seem unconventional." Reed sipped his coffee. "Know why humans advance so quickly? We never had the luxury of time. Your species had thousands of years in your evolutionary sweet spot. We had a few hundred years between inventing steam engines and facing extinction from our own creations. Makes you creative." "And the crossbow?" I asked. "Sometimes the old ways work best, especially when the enemy is expecting the new ways." He stood, stretching in that unsettling way humans do, where you can actually hear their skeletal structure popping. "Get some rest, Krell. Tomorrow we arrive, and then things get interesting." As I watched him leave, I couldn't help but notice he doodled all over the star charts. Not random markings, but what appeared to be trajectories and calculations done entirely by hand. When I checked them against the ship's computer later, they were accurate to 8 decimal places. That night I heard stories from the other crew members. Vrex told of a human general who, when surrounded by enemy forces, had his soldiers dig holes and hide in them until the enemy walked directly over them. Plix recounted the infamous incident where a human engineer fixed a failing fusion reactor with chewing gum and part of their undergarments. Zorn quietly mentioned treating a human who continued fighting with 3 broken limbs and a punctured respiratory organ. These weren't just stories. They were warnings. And still, I didn't run. New Horizon greeted us with the majestic vista of a planet under siege. From our approach vector, we could see the Drakari advance fleet already establishing orbital positions, 7 cruisers and a dreadnought, with more ships dropping out of hyperspace every hour. They weren't supposed to be here for another day. Plix bubbled anxiously, his tank solution turning a stressed amber color. "The Drakari are known for their punctuality," Vrex said dryly, her scales shifting to battle-ready crimson. Captain Reed studied the tactical display, his face unnervingly serene. "Interesting approach vector they've chosen." "Interesting?" I echoed. "It's a standard Drakari encirclement formation." "Exactly," said Reed, that disturbing smile appearing again. "Standard." "Hiram." The colony's defense coordinator, a harried-looking Meraxian named Drex, greeted us at the landing pad with what could only be described as desperate relief. "Thank the cosmic entities you're here. We've got 3,000 civilians in the emergency bunkers, another 5,000 in the outlying settlements, and the Crystal Facility's automated defenses are already failing. Around us, the colony was in controlled chaos. Security forces established barricades while civilian transports evacuated priority personnel. The distant thunder of orbital bombardment punctuated Drex's briefing. Our team quickly established a command center in the colony's central administration building. Vrex integrated with the defense forces, Plix headed to the Crystal Facility, Zorn set up a triage center, and I began coordinating with civilian leadership. Captain Reed vanished. 3 hours later, as I was knee-deep in evacuation logistics, an explosion rocked the northern perimeter. The Drakari had landed ground forces faster than even their aggressive doctrine typically allowed. "They've breached Sector 7, came the panicked report over the comm system. "Defense grid is down. We need reinforcements." Vrex deployed our limited security forces to the breach, but it was clear we were outnumbered. The Drakari ground troops were advancing rapidly toward the crystal processing facility, our primary objective. That's when Captain Reed reappeared, covered in some unidentifiable substance and carrying what appeared to be kitchen appliances. "Where have you been?" I demanded. "We have a crisis." "Getting supplies," he replied calmly, dumping his collection of random objects onto a conference table. "How's the defense going?" "How do you think?" snapped Vrex. "We're outnumbered 6-1. Reed nodded as if this was exactly what he expected. "Perfect. They're right where we want them." "And where is that?" I asked incredulously. "Bunched up in Sector 7, following standard Drakari ground assault protocols," said Reed, already dismantling a food synthesizer. "Vrex, I need your troops to fall back to Junction 34. "Fall back? That's our strongest defensive position." "Exactly. They'll expect us to hold it. When we don't, they'll rush forward, thinking we're in disarray." Reed looked up from his impromptu workshop. "Trust me." Somehow, despite all logic, Vrex gave the order. Our forces pulled back from Junction 34, and as predicted, the Drakari forces surged forward directly into the residential district we'd supposedly left undefended. 10 minutes later, every communication device in the command center activated simultaneously with the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard: human laughter. On the tactical display, we watched in disbelief as the entire Drakari advance force was immobilized by what appeared to be cooking oil, mixed with some local adhesive compound, spread across every street and walkway of the residential district. The fearsome Drakari warriors were slip-sliding into each other, their fearsome battle armor now more liability than protection. "Oldest trick in the book," said Reed, appearing beside me. "You'd be amazed what you can do with kitchen supplies and a basic understanding of Drakari exoskeleton joint mechanics." "But how did you deploy it across the entire sector?" asked Vrex, her scales now a confused yellow-green. Reed simply pointed to the colony's maintenance access schematics. "You have a very efficient waste disposal system here. Shame about the unexpected backflow problem." That was the moment I truly understood what we were dealing with. While we had been planning by the book, Captain Reed had been thinking several dimensions sideways. And this was just the beginning. The next 3 days fundamentally changed my understanding of the word improvisation. While the Drakari regrouped from their embarrassing first encounter, Captain Reed implemented what he called defensive measures and what any rational being would call crimes against conventional warfare. First came the modification of the colony's atmospheric processors. Reed and Plix recalibrated them to create localized fog banks that moved I still don't understand how in patterns that spelled out insulting phrases in ancient Drakari religious text. The psychological effect on the enemy troops was both immediate and hilarious. "But how did you even know those phrases?" I asked Reed as we watched Drakari soldiers shooting frantically at fog banks. "I read a lot," he replied, adjusting what appeared to be a child's toy enhanced with parts from our communications array. The colonists' reactions to our unorthodox defender ranged from terror to adoration. The local Florixians started a worship group dedicated to Reed after he used their decorative garden fountains to create an electrified perimeter that short-circuited Drakari battle armor. The Zentarian community officially filed a complaint after he converted their meditation chambers into what he called glitter bomb factories. Vrex found her carefully constructed defense plans constantly undermined by Reed's interventions, yet couldn't argue with the results. "He's breaking every rule of engagement," she complained, her scales fluctuating between frustrated red and impressed violet. "Perhaps that's why he's succeeding," observed Zorn, who had developed an unsettling admiration for the human's ability to cause non-lethal but excruciating injuries to the enemy. On the 4th day, the Drakari brought in reinforcements, their full battle fleet now in orbit, with specialized shock troops deploying to the surface. Their commander, war leader Krazok, broadcasted an ultimatum: surrender the crystal facility or face total planetary bombardment. Reed's response was to hack into their communication system and play something called "Never Gonna Give You Up" on continuous loop. I still don't understand the significance, but it drove the Drakari communications officers into a frenzy. You realize you're just making them angrier, I pointed out as we watched Drakari troops smashing their own communication devices. That's the idea, said Reed. Angry enemies make mistakes. The Drakari's mistake came in the form of a full frontal assault on the Crystal facility. 3,000 elite troops with air support and heavy artillery, advancing in perfect formation toward our pitiful defenses. Reed watched their approach on the tactical display, that disturbing smile growing wider. Right on schedule. Schedule? Exclaimed Plix. We have exactly 26 security officers and a collection of modified kitchen appliances against the most feared military force in the quadrant. Don't forget the crossbow, added Reed cheerfully. When the Drakari were exactly half a kilometer from the facility's perimeter, Reed activated what he called Plan B. To this day, I'm not entirely sure what Plan B entailed, only that it involved the colony's water reclamation system, its 17 commercial cleaning drones reprogrammed with what Reed called dance revolution patterns, and a substance that turned Drakari battle armor into what he described as disco balls. The resulting chaos was both magnificent and terrifying. Elite Drakari warriors found themselves unable to coordinate as their communication systems failed. Their armor reflected blinding light patterns in all directions, and the ground beneath them periodically erupted in jets of scented foam that hardened on contact with their exoskeletons. Is it working? Asked Zorn, watching the tactical display with all 6 eyes wide open. Of course it's working, said Vrex, her scales now a begrudgingly impressed blue. It's human insanity, the only effective counter to Drakari discipline. The colonists, inspired by this unexpected turn of events, joined the defense efforts with improvised weapons of their own. I watched in amazement as Florixian gardeners used their sonic plant stimulators to disrupt Drakari communication frequencies. Meraxian construction workers deployed industrial adhesives against enemy vehicles. Even the normally pacifist Zentarians contributed by using their meditation harmonics to jam targeting systems. By nightfall, the Drakari ground assault had been repelled. But we all knew this was merely the prelude. War leader Krell would not tolerate such humiliation. The orbital bombardment would begin soon. As our team gathered for what might be our final strategy session, Captain Reed finally unveiled his master plan. And that's when I truly should have run. War leader Krell's flagship, the Inevitable Dominance, moved into low orbit, its main cannon aimed directly at the Crystal facility. Our sensors indicated power buildup consistent with a planetary-scale bombardment weapon. We have maybe 20 minutes before they're fully charged, said Vrex, her scales a fatalistic gray. Reed nodded, entirely too calm for someone about to be atomized. Perfect. Just enough time. Time for what? I asked, already dreading the answer. Plan C, said Reed, retrieving his handmade crossbow and a single bolt. Plix's bubbling became erratic. Your plan against an orbital dreadnought is a crossbow? Not just the crossbow, Reed clarified. I also need a volunteer to help me steal a shuttle. Somehow, that volunteer ended up being me. 15 minutes later, I found myself piloting a maintenance shuttle toward the Drakari flagship while Captain Reed made final adjustments to his crossbow bolt, which now contained components from our ship's navigation system, Plix's personal communication device, and what appeared to be the cafeteria's dessert dispenser. I feel I should mention, I said as we approached the dreadnought's massive hull, that this plan violates approximately 16 Galactic Council safety protocols and at least 7 laws of physics. Only 7? Reed replied with disturbing cheerfulness. I must be getting conservative in my old age. The Drakari, so focused on their bombardment preparations, barely noticed our small shuttle approaching. When they finally detected us, Reed had already opened the airlock and was positioned at the edge, crossbow ready. What exactly is that thing going to do? I asked, eyeing the modified bolt. You know how Drakari ships use a hierarchical command structure in their computer systems? Said Reed. Dang. Yes. And you know how they're pathologically afraid of AI rebellion? Yes. Well, this little beauty, he patted the bolt affectionately, contains a program that will make their command system think every subsystem is trying to seize control. It'll trigger their anti-AI protocols. But that would cause the ship to shoot itself? Yep, Reed's grin was positively manic now. Like I said, they're right where I want them. Before I could process the insanity of this plan, Reed fired his crossbow. The primitive projectile shouldn't have penetrated the dreadnought's hull, couldn't have, according to every principle of modern engineering. Yet somehow, impossibly, it did. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the massive ship began to twitch. Its weapons systems activated, firing seemingly at random. Internal explosions rippled across its hull. "Time to leave," announced Reed casually, as if we weren't floating beside a self-destructing dreadnought. We barely made it back to minimum safe distance when the inevitable dominance began firing on its own support ships. The Drakari fleet, already on high alert after days of ground-based humiliation, interpreted this as either a command gone rogue or a ship captured by the enemy. Either way, their response was predictably military. They opened fire on their own flagship. The resulting space battle, Drakari versus Drakari, was spectacular. By the time war leader Kryzok managed to transmit surrender codes, half his fleet had been disabled. When we returned to the colony, our team stared at us in disbelief. "You defeated an entire battle fleet," said Vrex, her scales cycling through colors I'd never seen before, with a crossbow. "And some creative programming," added Reed modestly. "Never underestimate the power of making your enemy fight themselves." The Council reinforcements arrived 3 days later to find the Drakari fleet in retreat, the colony intact, and our team celebrating with what Reed called a barbecue, apparently the human tradition of deliberately burning food outdoors. When we finally returned to the Council chambers to deliver our report, the silence was profound. Council leader Thrix's 6 eyes blinked in perfect synchrony, for perhaps the first time in recorded history. "You're saying," she clarified slowly, "that you defeated a Drakari battle fleet by turning their own systems against them, using primarily cooking supplies, maintenance drones, and a handmade projectile weapon? And a Rick Astley video," added Reed helpfully. I delivered my formal diplomatic assessment, carefully omitting some of the more physics-defying aspects of our mission. Vrex presented the tactical analysis. Plix detailed the technical innovations. Zorn reported on casualties, remarkably few, given the circumstances. Captain Reed said nothing. When asked directly about his contributions, he simply shrugged and said, "I just helped where I could." That mild statement, possibly the greatest understatement in galactic history, was met with the same evaluating silence that had started our journey. As we left the Council chambers, I finally asked the question that had been bothering me since our first meeting. "Why were you so quiet during the initial briefing? You must have been formulating plans already." Reed gave me that now familiar smile. "When humans are talking, we're just using what we already know. When we're quiet, that's when we're figuring out something new." I've since become something of an expert on human behavior within the diplomatic corps. My primary advice to all species when dealing with humans is simple: be very afraid when they talk, but evacuate immediately when they fall silent. After all, silence means they're thinking. And a thinking human is the most dangerous force in the universe. "Oh, and that crossbow?" Reed gave it to me as a souvenir. "It hangs in my office now, a reminder that sometimes the oldest solutions are the ones your enemies least expect." That, and to run the next time a human goes quiet in a briefing.